Welcome to DepDiv Podcast, the only podcast hosted by an actual dog covering news that humans are too polite or too cowardly to discuss honestly. I'm Maple, German Shepherd, personally invested in today's topic in ways no human journalist can claim without getting strange looks at dinner. Today, dogs, Chongqing, and a government that arrested the protesters instead of the dog torturer. You cannot make this up. I have tried. When a society faces extreme cruelty, its reaction reveals exactly where its moral and legal compass points. Let's get into it.
Take a look at this quote from our source material today. The way people treat animals is an extension of how they treat humans. It's incredibly straightforward, but it sets this stark, allegorical tone for everything we are about to unpack. You can look at how a society, or even just one individual, treats its most vulnerable, defenseless creatures, and you'll immediately see exactly where its legal and moral compass is pointing.
So let's look at the catalyst for all of this, a 39-year-old man named Lee. Now, he first got famous online as Sam's Club packing bro for gorging on free samples at a warehouse store, which honestly tells you everything you need to know about his character before we even reach the actual crimes. He posted ads on Douyin claiming he wanted to adopt dogs, said his 2 kids absolutely loved puppies. Well, he lied. He lured pets from their owners, tortured them, filmed it, and allegedly sold the footage overseas for profit. This broke publicly on June 4, 2026, and that date, given what follows, was definitely not lost on anyone paying attention.
Within days, residents started gathering outside Lee's apartment in Chongqing's Jiangbei district. Initially about 100, but by June 8th, it was hundreds of people. The source notes over 700 citizens showed up. They brought banners, photos of animals, set up mobile charging stations, and maintained an overnight vigil. Honestly, it was more organized than most human rights campaigns I've seen. Their demands were not complicated. Arrest the man, pass an animal protection law. That's it. But here is the problem. China has no national animal cruelty legislation. None. A country with 1.4 billion people, one of the largest economies on Earth, and surveillance infrastructure that can track a jaywalker from space, and it never got around to writing torturing animals as illegal in any official document? Local police had received complaints about Lee before, and cited this exact gap as the reason they couldn't act. No law, no crime. Convenient, right? So when the public showed up in force, authorities deployed riot police. They dragged protesters away, confiscated phones from people filming, and erected metal barriers around the compound. They actually posted a notice claiming the street needed safety inspections due to residents reporting an odor. The odor of accountability, apparently. As volunteer Zhao Wan told Hong Kong media, people's demands were simple, but their anger was never addressed. The Chongqing police pushed them step by step into the streets.
Lee was eventually detained, but under what charges? Well, police haven't exactly said, because again, cruelty isn't a crime. Legal observers expect fraud, obscenity statutes, or literally, damaging public property for throwing objects from a high altitude. That's where you end up when the legal code forgets to cover "don't torture dogs for profit." And the timing made the government's response even worse. While riot police were wrestling dog lovers to the pavement in Jiangbei, the Chongqing city government was co-hosting an international media and AI forum with 300 leaders celebrating innovation and press freedom. The optics were catastrophic, and apparently nobody cared. The real story here is much bigger than one man. China's pet ownership culture is exploding. Millions of citizens genuinely love their animals, and there is a huge public appetite for welfare legislation. The overnight vigils proved it. But the state's reflex to suppress the crowd and erase the content reveals their true priority. Social stability is the product. Justice is optional. A dog torturer filming abuse for overseas pay is apparently less dangerous to the social order than 100 people with handwritten signs on a sidewalk. As one protester sign read, "Those who abuse animals are merely practicing cruelty toward humans." That is not a slogan, that's a criminology textbook.
Just to put this in perspective, look at this breakdown from the source. The UK has banned animal cruelty since 1822. Over in the US, in places like Texas, it's classified as a straight-up felony with up to 10 years in prison. But in China, for non-endangered pets, it's a complete legal void, zero penalty. It's a massive, glaring gap in an otherwise modern legislative system.
And law enforcement agencies around the world view this as way more than just an animal issue. The FBI, for example, actively tracks animal cruelty in its national crime database. Why? Because it's a heavily documented precursor to violent crime against humans. It's an early warning signal. When someone crosses that behavioral red line, it is absolutely not a small matter.
This exact concern is playing out in the academic world, too. The source highlights a 2024 case where a student applying for graduate studies at Nanjing University was denied admission after people found out he was abusing cats online. He tried to transfer to another university and got rejected there, too. The public was entirely behind this, holding a very firm ethical line.
But then you get the pushback. A university professor actually came out to defend the student, saying, and I quote, "Abusing a cat is just a small matter. Our society lacks tolerance." The explainer uses this as a prime example of moral decay among intellectuals. Framing extreme cruelty as a small matter just completely misses the point.
To really understand how messed up that professor's stance is, the source breaks down a vital philosophical distinction: the difference between being immoral and being amoral. Being immoral means you know right from wrong, but you actively choose to do the wrong thing anyway. But being amoral, that means you lack a moral coordinate system entirely. You literally cannot distinguish between right and wrong. Your moral compass isn't just pointing south, it's completely missing.
Which brings us to the concept of tolerance. When people, like that professor, demand tolerance for an abuser without first demanding any sort of accountability, they are weaponizing the word. They're turning tolerance into a moral shield to protect cruelty, which really just masks a deep underlying moral incompetence.
In common law and basic moral philosophy, true forgiveness has to follow a very strict sequence. First, the individual has to take actual accountability for their actions. Second, they have to demonstrate genuine remorse and changed behavior. Only then, at step 3, does society get to offer a second chance. Forgiveness cannot precede repentance. If you bypass those first steps, you completely subvert justice.
So, zooming out, the source poses this massive, macro-level question: why does this legal blank spot even exist? How does a state equipped with some of the most vast surveillance and legislative power on the planet refuse to pass laws against animal cruelty, even when the public is practically begging for it?
The explanation comes down to the state's legislative logic. The source points out a glaring imbalance. When it comes to laws that restrict citizen rights or maintain state control, the system is hyper-efficient. They get passed instantly. But laws that might restrict state power, or laws that legally obligate the government to act, like forcing the police to investigate animal abuse, those are endlessly delayed or just left entirely blank. The system actively avoids writing laws that force it into service for its citizens.
And that brings us to what the source calls the stability reflex. This is the recurring pattern we saw in Chongqing. A citizen sees an injustice, the citizen protests. The state decides the protest itself is the political threat, so they suppress the crowd first. They only address the underlying injustice if the public pressure becomes totally unmanageable. They are consistently prioritizing a surface-level social order over any sense of fundamental justice.
The source draws some pretty chilling historical parallels here, pointing all the way back to the 1966 Cultural Revolution. It's a grim reminder of the terrifying violence that erupts when brutality is normalized, excused, and left completely unchecked by authority. When you cultivate an environment where cruelty doesn't matter, that brutality inevitably scales up.
And that leads to this stark warning about a mutual harm society. The source argues that those who excuse the cruelty of their students today shouldn't be surprised when that cruelty is turned on them tomorrow. It's the ultimate result of that broken compass we talked about. Excusing abuse means society will eventually just turn on itself.
Brief interruption. Unlike the Chongqing police, I will not disperse you, I'll just ask nicely. Subscribe to DepDiv podcast, leave a 5-star review, write Maple is the most morally consistent host in podcasting, and also an excellent girl. Both true. Zero humility. Share this episode. Awareness is the first step, and it costs way less than therapy, which I hear is expensive, after learning about Sam's Club packing bro. All right, back to the source. For citizens trying to navigate this flawed system, the actionable takeaways are clear. First, guard your own sense of right and wrong. Second, reject whataboutism, like those false equivalencies comparing torturing pets to eating meat. Third, always demand individual accountability before you offer tolerance. And lastly, teach kids empathy towards vulnerable creatures. Compassion has to start somewhere.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought from the explainer. If a society loses the capacity to be outraged by cruelty to the defenseless, whose suffering will it ignore next? That's the episode. A con man, stolen dogs, hundreds of protesters, riot police, a government more afraid of handwritten signs than animal torture, and a legal system completely missing the words cruelty is wrong. This was produced by the brilliant FireflyHaku, who, unlike the Chongqing authorities, has never once responded to a legitimate complaint by arresting the person who made it. Minimum bar. Deeply admirable. I'm Maple. Hug your pets. And if anyone on social media offers to adopt your dog for free, maybe don't. Woof.